Monsters do not fear the dark, nor do they fear the energy weapons of standard empires. But watch a seasoned galactic warlord tremble when the dead space of Sector 4 suddenly lights up. Why do they run? Because the apex predators of the galaxy never died. They were just sleeping. Victor Draven stood before the holographic projection of the Orion Spur, his eyes reflecting the synthetic amber glow of dying star systems. As the Supreme Commander of the Zenith Vanguard, he had spent the last 40 years subjugating every species that dared to look up at the stars with ambition. His fleet was a masterpiece of engineered terror, a sprawling armada of dreadnoughts that blotted out the suns of alien worlds. They were the undisputed monsters of the galaxy, a ruthless apex force that consumed resources and left only ash in their wake. Footsteps echoed against the metallic grating of the command deck. Gideon Wright, the chief strategic advisor, and one of the oldest living beings in the Vanguard's employ, approached slowly. Gideon leaned heavily on a composite cane, his face lined with the deep crevices of a century spent witnessing Victor's atrocities. Gideon was not a warrior. He was an archivist, an elder forced into service after his own people were decimated. His survival was contingent entirely on his unparalleled memory of galactic history. Commander Draven. Gideon said, his voice a raspy baritone that commanded an eerie respect, even among the Vanguard's most bloodthirsty lieutenants. The navigation computers have registered your new coordinates. You are charting a course directly into Sector 4. I must implore you to reconsider this trajectory. Victor did not turn away from the projection. Sector 4 is rich in raw plasma and unmined heavy metals, Gideon. Our scouts report no active energy shields, no military patrols, and a complete absence of quantum communications. It is a dead zone, ripe for the taking. It is not dead, Gideon corrected, gripping his cane until his knuckles turned pale. It is dormant. You are looking at the borders of the Sol system. The species that resides there calls themselves humanity. They have not broadcasted a quantum signal in over 500 years because they chose to isolate themselves. They closed their borders after the Orion Wars. Victor chuckled, a harsh, grating sound that lacked any real humor. If they have been isolated for 5 centuries, they are technologically stagnant. They are likely fighting over scraps of dirt with primitive combustion engines. My Vanguard will sweep through their worlds in a matter of days. You misunderstand the nature of their silence, Gideon urged, stepping closer to the hologram. He tapped a command sequence, bringing up highly classified, heavily corrupted data files from the archives. Blurry images flickered to life, massive mechanical structures, eclipsing stars' weapons of unspeakable scale, and the broken fleets of the last empire that tried to cross their borders. They did not isolate themselves out of weakness. They isolated themselves because they realized what they were capable of. I was a young archivist during the Orion Wars. I saw what they did to the Kalan hive mind. They didn't just defeat them, Victor. They erased them from the galactic registry. Victor turned to face the elder, his expression hardening. Stories. Myths fabricated by terrified survivors to explain their own tactical failures. Ideal in reality, Gideon. And the reality is that my fleet needs fuel and the Sol system has it. Prepare the armada. We jump to Sector 4 at 0800 hours. Gideon lowered his head, a heavy sigh escaping his lips. You believe yourself to be the monster of this galaxy, Victor? You believe your cruelty makes you invincible. But there is a fundamental difference between a monster and a nightmare. Monsters hunt for survival and ego. Nightmares exist simply to remind the monsters that they are not safe in the dark. Enough of your poetry, old man. Victor snapped, his patience exhausted. If these humans are the nightmares you claim they are, then they are about to experience a very rude awakening. That, Gideon whispered as he turned to leave the command deck, is exactly what I am afraid of. The Zenith Vanguard moved with the terrifying precision of a well-oiled machine. Thousands of warships slipped through the quantum fold, bypassing the natural cosmic barriers that surrounded Sector 4. They emerged on the edge of the Oort cloud, the outermost boundary of the human territory. Victor stood on his observation deck, staring at the vast, silent expanse of space. To his naked eye there was nothing but void and distant starlight. His sensors, however, picked up a solitary, seemingly defenseless outpost orbiting a rogue planetoid. It was a civilian mining rig, antiquated and sluggish, completely lacking in defensive armaments. "Target acquired, Wastorf," announced Lieutenant David Miller, a sycophantic officer who eager to earn Victor's favor. "Registry indicates it is a human settlement. Designation Outpost Delta Niner. Population is roughly 3,000. Minimal energy signatures detected. No military presence." "Perfect." Victor smiled, a cruel curl of his lips. "Let us introduce ourselves to our new subjects. Charge the primary plasma batteries. Target their life support systems and communication arrays. I want them suffocating and silent before we board." The Vanguard's dreadnoughts powered up their weapons, glowing with a sick radioactive green light. In a matter of seconds, they unleashed a devastating barrage against the mining rig. The vacuum of space offered no sound, but the visual destruction was absolute. The outpost's communication tower shattered, sending jagged debris spiraling into the void. Sections of the hull breached venting oxygen and unidentifiable debris into the cold vacuum. Victor watched the carnage with grim satisfaction. "Send a tight beam transmission to their command center, if they still have one. Tell them the Zenith Vanguard claims this territory. They will surrender all resources and submit to immediate subjugation, or they will be annihilated." Aboard Outpost Delta Niner chaos reigned, but it was not the panicked, screaming chaos Victor Draven had envisioned. It was a cold, disciplined emergency response. Director Shelley Morales, a pragmatic woman with silver-streaked hair and a career built on managing deep space hazards, gripped the edge of her command console as the deck shook violently beneath her boots. Red warning lights bathed the room in a bloody hue. "Damage report!" Shelley barked, her voice cutting through the blaring klaxons. "Life support in sectors 3 and 4 is compromised. Comm is completely gone. We are physically cut off from the standard relay," shouted her chief engineer Thomas Bradley. "They fired on us without provocation. Scans indicate a massive armada. Over 3,000 capital ships." "They're hailing us," another technician yelled. "Tight beam direct to our mainframe. Audio only." Shelley slammed her fist onto the comms button. "Put it through." Victor Draven's voice echoed through the bridge, dripping with arrogance. "Attention, human outpost. You are currently at the mercy of the Zenith Vanguard. Surrender your facility and prepare for subjugation. Any resistance will be met with absolute eradication." Shelley did not flinch. She looked at Thomas, her expression hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated resolve. "They hit the decoy comm array. Is the dark matter tether still intact?" "Yes, Director." Thomas confirmed, his fingers flying across his terminal. "The tether is secure. Send the code," Shelley ordered. "Director, if we send that code?" Thomas hesitated, a flicker of genuine fear passing through his eyes. "We break the 500-year mandate. We wake them up." "They brought a war fleet to our front door and fired on a civilian rig," Shelley said coldly. "The mandate is already broken. Send the signal. Let Earth know the monsters are at the gates." Deep beneath the surface of the outpost, shielded by meters of lead and quantum-locked vault doors, a singular, ancient machine hummed to life. It did not broadcast a radio wave or a light signal. Instead, it plucked at a string of dark matter that connected directly to the heart of the Sol system. A silent alarm instantaneously bridging the light years. On Earth, in a subterranean command bunker, beneath the ruins of old Geneva, General Anthony Crestwood was drinking his morning coffee when the primary console in the center of the room illuminated for the first time in 5 centuries. The room, usually populated by a skeleton crew of bored technicians, suddenly froze. The screen displayed a single flashing red word, incursion. Crestwood, a man whose family had guarded this silent post for generations, slowly set his ceramic mug down. He didn't panic. He didn't shout. He simply walked over to the biometric scanner, placed his hand on the glass, and leaned into the retinal reader. Voice authorization required. The AI intoned its voice, a smooth, synthetic alto. Crestwood Anthony. Authorization protocol Archangel. The wolves are in the pasture. He spoke clearly, his heart beating a steady rhythmic drum in his chest. Authorization accepted. Unlocking the Sol defense grid. Waking the dormant fleets. Good morning, General. Across the solar system, the illusion of a quiet, stagnant civilization shattered. On Mars, what appeared to be massive rusty craters suddenly irised open, revealing silos containing thousands of dreadnought-class warships, their hulls gleaming with advanced metamaterials. The rings of Saturn shifted as cloaking fields deactivated, exposing a sprawling network of automated defense platforms bristling with antimatter artillery. And on the dark side of the moon, the true human armada powered its engines, painting the lunar surface with the blue fire of fusion drives. Back at the edge of the Oort cloud, Victor Dreven was growing impatient. They haven't surrendered. Destroy the outpost. Before his gunners could even lock onto the remains of Delta Niner, the fabric of space, directly in front of the Zenith Vanguard, began to tear. It wasn't a standard quantum jump. The space was being violently ripped apart, glowing with a blinding, ethereal, violet light. Commander. Lieutenant Miller screamed, his face draining of color. Massive energy spikes detected. I don't understand the readings. It's off the charts. It's tearing the local physics models apart. From the violet rifts, the human fleet emerged. They did not look like the crude combustion engine ships Victor had imagined. They were sleek, predatory monoliths of black metal and glowing blue circuitry. They didn't number in the thousands, they numbered in the tens of thousands. And leading them was a flagship so massive it possessed its own gravitational pull, the UES Retribution. General Anthony Crestwood stood on the bridge of the Retribution, looking at the tactical display, mapping the Zenith Vanguard's position. They fired on a civilian mining rig. Crestwood noted his voice, flat devoid of any emotion. It was the voice of a man who viewed the enemy not as a threat, but as an administrative error that needed to be corrected. Analyze their shielding. Standard plasma deflection, sir, his tactical officer replied. Primitive. We can punch through it with kinetic drivers. They came into our house, broke our things, and threatened our people, Crestwood said, adjusting his uniform cuffs. Lock onto their command vessel. Disable their engines. I want them trapped in the dark. Then initiate a localized Kessler cascade around their fleet. Let their own hubris crush them. Victor Dreven watched in absolute horror as the human fleet moved with terrifying, instantaneous synchronization. They didn't open comms. They didn't demand surrender. They simply executed flawlessly. In less than 3 minutes, humanity fired a volley of hypervelocity kinetic slugs that bypassed the Vanguard's shields, entirely shattering the engines of every capital ship in Victor's fleet. The Vanguard was instantly paralyzed, dead in the water. Then the humans deployed the mining drones from Delta Niner swarms of automated heavily armored machines that grabbed the debris from the destroyed Vanguard engines and began accelerating it in a rapid orbit around Victor's fleet. "What are they doing?" Victor gasped, gripping his console as alarms wailed around him. Gideon Wright stepped up beside him, leaning on his cane, a look of profound, mournful vindication on his ancient face. "They are building a cage, Victor. A cage made of our own broken ships. I warned you. You thought you were the predator. You forgot the fundamental rule of the universe." "Which is," Victor whispered, his arrogance finally shattering into pure terror as the orbital debris began tearing his outer hull apart. "Never wake a sleeping giant," Gideon replied, "because when it opens its eyes it will not stop until the monsters are dead." Alarms blared endlessly inside the command bridge of the Vanguard flagship. Victor Draven clung to his tactical console, his knuckles turning white as he watched the holographic display paint a picture of absolute, inescapable doom. The human fleet, vast and geometric, hovered at a calculated distance, refusing to fire a single plasma volley. They didn't need to. The trap they had sprung was far more insidious, a masterpiece of applied physics that weaponized the Vanguard's own shattered hulls. Swarms of autonomous human mining drones, originally designed to hollow out asteroids, were now acting as tugboats of death. They latched onto the massive dead engines of the crippled Vanguard dreadnoughts and accelerated them into a chaotic high-velocity orbit around the surviving fleet. "Hull breaches reported on decks 4 through 9. Lieutenant David Miller shrieked, his voice cracking under the mounting pressure. "The debris field is condensing, so they are creating an artificial gravity while using our own destroyed ships. The kinetic impacts are stripping our armor plates faster than our repair drones can patch them." Victor stared at the screen, unable to comprehend the sheer tactical audacity. To orchestrate a localized Kessler syndrome, a runaway cascade of orbital collisions required computational power that bordered on the divine. The humans were calculating the trajectory of millions of pieces of jagged metal in real time, ensuring that every chunk of shrapnel bounced and ricocheted in a way that tightened the deadly net around Victor's flagship. "Target the drones," Victor commanded, desperation finally cracking his authoritarian facade. "Blast them out of the void. We can't get a lock," David replied, his fingers flying over the console. "Their sensor profiles are too small, and the interference from the debris is blinding our targeting arrays. We are trapped in a blender, Commander." Gideon Wright stood near the auxiliary viewing port, his ancient eyes reflecting the chaotic flashes of metal tearing into metal outside. He leaned heavily on his composite cane, seemingly at peace amidst the violent shaking of the deck. "You cannot shoot your way out of a mathematical certainty, Victor. They have turned the vacuum of space into an anvil, and we are the metal being struck." "Open a channel!" Victor growled pride, warring with his primal instinct to survive. "Open a wide-band frequency to the human flagship. Let me speak to their commander." Static hissed over the bridge's main audio system before resolving into a crisp, impossibly clear connection. The visual feed flickered to life on the primary monitor, revealing the bridge of the UES Retribution. It was a stark contrast to the Vanguard's opulent, throne-like command center. The human bridge was utilitarian, bathed in low ambient light and dominated by cascading streams of data. In the center sat General Anthony Crestwood. He was not wearing ceremonial armor, adorned with medals of conquest. He wore a simple pressed dark uniform with an ancient insignia stitched onto his shoulder. He held a ceramic mug in one hand and looked at the screen with the mild annoyance of an office manager dealing with a minor logistical error. "This is General Crestwood of the United Earth Systems." The human spoke, taking a slow sip from his mug. "State your intent. Zenith Vanguard." Victor stood tall, attempting to project the authority he had wielded for 4 decades. I am Supreme Commander Victor Draven. You have ambushed my fleet with cowardly indirect tactics. Cease this debris assault immediately, or I will detonate the hypermatter cores of my outer ships, taking your drones and your mining outpost with us." Crestwood didn't blink. He simply set his mug down on his console. "You are not in a position to negotiate, Draven. You crossed into quarantined territory, fired upon civilian contractors, and attempted to claim assets that do not belong to you. You are currently trapped in a kinetic containment field. Your fleet is being systematically dismantled. If you detonate your hypermatter cores, the resulting shockwave will reflect off the debris shield and instantly vaporize your command ship. We, however, are stationed exactly 3,000 kilometers outside the blast radius." Victor's jaw tightened. "You are bluffing." "We do not bluff. We calculate," Crestwood replied evenly. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his desk. "Did you ever bother to scan the deep structural architecture of your own warp drives, Commander Draven? Or did you just blindly accept the technology your ancestors salvaged during the first expansion?" Victor frowned, exchanging a confused glance with Gideon. "What are you talking about?" "Look closely at the insignia on my uniform," Crestwood said, tapping his shoulder. 500 years ago, before the Sol system locked its borders, humanity didn't just fight wars. We built the infrastructure of the galaxy. We contracted it out. The insignia you are looking at belongs to the Lockheed Martin Advanced Deep Space Division, an ancient corporate conglomerate that outlived nations, outlived planetary governments, and eventually funded the very fleets that patrol our borders. Crestwood typed a single command into his terminal. "Your entire empire, Draven, is built on stolen, reverse-engineered, proprietary human technology. Your hypermatter cores, your shield emitters. They are bootlegged copies of our Mark IV patents, and we always leave a back door in the firmware. We didn't isolate ourselves because we were afraid. We isolated ourselves because the galaxy owed us a debt we knew you could never repay. We simply waited for you to come to us." A sharp digital chime echoed through the Vanguard bridge. Suddenly the primary console went dark. The hum of the life support systems dropped an octave. The artificial gravity lessened. Sir David panicked. "Our core reactor is shutting down. All defensive grids are offline. The primary software is locked. I'm getting a massive data packet from the human flagship. It's a cease and desist order." They just invoked a hardware lockout. Victor Draven, the terror of the Orion spur, stood paralyzed as the sheer weight of the humiliation crashed down upon him. He was not being defeated in a glorious fiery battle of cosmic proportions. He was being shut down by a galactic copyright strike. Humanity had weaponized corporate bureaucracy. "You have 5 minutes to abandon your outer ships and transfer all personnel to your flagship." Crestwood stated his voice, flat and uncompromising. "Once your personnel are aboard, you will power down your weapons and prepare for boarding. If you do not comply, we will simply let the debris cage collapse inward." The screen blinked off, leaving Victor staring at his own pale reflection in the darkened glass. The surrender of the Zenith Vanguard was not a spectacle. It was an audit. Human boarding parties clad in heavily armored, mechanized exosuits breached the Vanguard flagship without firing a single kinetic round. They moved with terrifying efficiency, restraining the alien crew and cataloging every piece of equipment on the ship. Victor Draven was stripped of his ceremonial armor, his rank insignias torn from his chest by an automated sorting drone. He was marched down the corridors of his own ship, his wrists bound by dense magnetic cuffs. Gideon Wright walked beside him, requiring no restraints, his aged face a mask of silent resignation. "You knew," Victor hissed at the old archivist, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and absolute dread. You knew they possessed this capability. I knew they possessed the means to erase us, Gideon corrected softly. I did not foresee the method. I told you, Victor, they are not monsters. They are something much worse. They are landlords, and you just kicked in the door of the property owner. They were loaded onto a human transport shuttle, a Spartan vessel completely lacking the aesthetic grandeur Victor was accustomed to. The journey was short, skipping through a localized dark matter fold that bypassed standard space entirely. When the shuttle's rear ramp lowered, Victor expected to see the sprawling, mechanized hellscape of a human prison world. Instead, the biting dry air of a subterranean cavern rushed into the cabin. Victor was shoved forward by a silent human guard, stumbling down the ramp onto a dusty, rocky floor. He blinked against the harsh industrial lighting, his eyes adjusting to the massive cavern around him. The air smelled of ozone, crushed stone, and sweat. Hundreds of former Vanguard soldiers, high-ranking lieutenants, and decorated fleet admirals were already there, dressed in simple grey utility jumpsuits. They were operating heavy machinery, breaking apart massive chunks of raw heavy metal ore and loading them onto automated conveyor belts. Victor looked up. Suspended high above the cavern floor, visible through a massive reinforced transparent dome, was the black void of space. And floating right in the center of his view was the jagged, half-destroyed silhouette of Outpost Delta 9. He was inside the very rogue planetoid he had ordered destroyed. Director Shelley Morales walked down a metal staircase, flanked by 2 mechanized guards. She wore a heavy environmental coat over her uniform, holding a digital tablet. She stopped in front of Victor, looking him up and down with the clinical detachment of a foreman inspecting a new piece of equipment. Victor Draven, Shelley said, reading from the tablet. Former Supreme Commander of the Zenith Vanguard. You have been assessed, processed, and assigned. Assigned? Victor spat his pride, flaring up one last time. You cannot do this. I am a sovereign leader. I demand to be treated as a prisoner of war under standard galactic conventions. Shelley lowered the tablet, her eyes narrowing slightly. You aren't a prisoner of war, Mr. Draven. Humanity hasn't declared war on the Vanguard. War implies an equal footing. What happened today was an asset seizure. She gestured to the sprawling mine around them. Your unprovoked attack on our outpost caused exactly 3,400,000,000 credits in infrastructure damage. Furthermore, the audit of your empire revealed 4 centuries of unpaid licensing fees, patent infringement, and unauthorized use of Lockheed Martin proprietary technology. The Vanguard economy is entirely bankrupt. Victor stared at her, his mind struggling to process the sheer, crushing reality of his situation. He had conquered star systems. He had made billions tremble. And now he was standing in the dirt being lectured about licensing fees. The human mandate of isolation is officially over. Shelley continued, turning her back on him and walking toward the command elevator. Earth has decided it is time to collect on our debts. Your home world, Zenith Prime, is currently being restructured by human financial auditors. Your people are being fed, your power grids are being upgraded, and your military has been permanently decommissioned. And what of me? Victor yelled after her, the fear finally breaking through his voice. Shelley paused at the elevator doors, glancing back over her shoulder. You are going to pay off your debt, Draven. 1 rock at a time. Here is your pickaxe. A heavy mechanized drone hovered next to Victor, dropping a solid, tungsten-tipped mining tool at his feet. It hit the rocky floor with a dull, heavy thud that seemed to echo into eternity. Welcome to Delta 9, Shelley said, as the elevator doors slid shut. Shift starts now. Victor Draven fell to his knees in the dust. He looked at the pickaxe, then up at the surviving remnants of the human outpost, hovering in the dark sky above. For the first time in his long, brutal life, he understood true power. True power wasn't a plasma battery. It wasn't a dreadnought. True power was the quiet, absolute certainty of a civilization that could turn your greatest weapons off with the push of a button and then force you to dig in the dirt to pay for the inconvenience. Across the galaxy, the dark spaces began to light up. The ancient relays hummed to life. The quantum comm lines, dead for half a millennium, suddenly flooded with traffic. The Zenith Vanguard was gone, erased not by fire, but by ledgers and law. The other empires of the Orion Spur watched in stunned silence as the Sol system reopened its borders. They watched the massive predatory fleets of humanity fan out across the stars carrying clipboards, contracts, and a terrifying promise of order. Why do the monsters run? Because the humans were awake, and they had come to collect the rent. Did you love this twist on the classic HFY sci-fi trope? Sometimes the most terrifying force in the universe isn't a laser beam. It's human bureaucracy and corporate karma. If you want more epic sci-fi stories where humanity proves why we are the undisputed masters of the galaxy, hit that like button, share this tale with your fellow sci-fi fans, and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss an upload. See you in the stars.